Hello everyone! If you enjoy my channel, please support me with one like, one subscribe, and one share.
The green card nightmare begins. You know that feeling when your stomach drops so fast you swear your organs just traded places. That moment when your brain screams no, but your mouth is already frozen, and everything around you suddenly sounds like it's underwater. That was me, standing in the middle of a crowded airport baggage claim in Chicago O'Hare, patting down my jacket pockets like a man who just realized he forgot his own name. And then it hit me, my wallet. The one with my green card. The one piece of plastic that said I was allowed to exist in this country. Gone, vanished. Probably left on the seat of that United flight from Denver. Or maybe it slipped out when I pulled out my phone. Or maybe, just maybe, the universe decided today was the perfect day to remind me how fragile everything really is. If you've ever felt that gut punch moment when something you took for granted disappears, stay with me. Because this story isn't about losing a card. It's about losing your sense of safety, your identity, and then finding it again through the most unlikely person, a tired DMV lady who had no reason to care. And by the end of this video, you'll see why slow English practice through real, messy, human stories is the only way that actually rewires your brain for good. But let's start at the beginning, the exact second my American life flashed before my eyes. Imagine you're in a foreign country where your entire legal status fits inside a piece of plastic the size of a credit card, not a passport, not a visa stamped with bold letters, just a thin, bendable card with your ugly mugshot and an expiration date. And one day, without warning, that card decides to walk out of your life. That was me, 3 years ago, returning from a quick trip to visit my sister in Texas. Nothing fancy. Just a weekend of tacos and terrible karaoke. I remember sliding into my seat on the plane home to Virginia, scrolling through my phone, completely relaxed. My wallet was in my back pocket, as always. I even remember feeling it when I buckled my seatbelt. But somewhere between the pretzel snack and the landing announcement, my brain checked out. I stood up, grabbed my carry-on, and walked off the plane like a normal human being. Normal. That's the word that haunts me now. Because normal people don't lose their green cards. Normal people don't suddenly become illegal in a country they've called home for 7 years. But here's the thing about normal: it's a lie. And your brain knows it. Neuroscience actually has a name for this. Habituation. Your brain stops paying attention to things that happen repeatedly, even important things, because it's trying to save energy. So, when you've pulled your wallet out 1,000 times without incident, your brain thinks, "Hey, nothing to see here." And that's exactly when disaster strikes. So I'm standing in baggage claim, patting my empty back pocket, then my front pockets, then my jacket, then my backpack. Nothing. My heart starts doing this weird skipping thing. Not romantic skipping. The kind of skipping that makes you wonder if you should sit down before you faint. I retrace my steps like a detective in a bad crime show. Back to the gate. The flight attendant says, "Sorry, sweetie, the plane's already being cleaned. You'll have to file a lost and found report online." Online. As if I have weeks. As if the clock isn't already ticking on my status. That's when the real panic sets in, the kind that makes your armpits sweat and your thoughts scatter like cockroaches in bright light. Because without that green card, I couldn't prove I was legal. Couldn't drive. Couldn't work. Couldn't fly anywhere, couldn't even cash a check at Walmart. I was a ghost walking around in a body that still looked like me. And here's what nobody tells you about losing your status document. It's not just the practical stuff. It's the shame. The feeling that you're stupid, irresponsible, careless. The voice in your head that says, "See, you don't deserve to be here. You couldn't even hold on to a card." That voice is loud. And it's mean. And it sounds exactly like every bully you've ever met. Except now it's living rent-free in your skull. I walked out of the airport that night without my wallet, without my green card, and without any idea what to do next. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped my car keys 3 times. I sat in my Honda Civic in the parking garage for 15 minutes, just breathing in and out, and then I did what any terrified immigrant would do. I googled lost green card on my phone. Big mistake. The internet is a nightmare factory. Every page screamed things like you could be deported and file Form I-90 immediately and wait times up to 12 months. 12 months. That's a whole year of not knowing if you'll be allowed to stay. A year of waking up every morning wondering if today's the day an ICE officer knocks on your door. A year of explaining to your American-born child why mummy or daddy can't drive them to soccer practice. I cry. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I cried right there in the driver's seat, my forehead pressed against the steering wheel, while the parking garage lights flickered above me like some kind of cruel disco ball. But crying doesn't fix anything. So I wiped my face, started the car, and drove home with one destination in mind: the DMV. Because somewhere in the fog of panic, I remembered that the DMV could issue temporary documents. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way out of this mess. Spoiler alert. There was. But not the way you think. And definitely not through the official rules printed on their dusty website. The real solution came from a woman who had no reason to help me, a woman who looked at my panicked face and saw her own past staring back. But that part comes later. First, I had to survive the DMV. And if you've ever been to a DMV in America, you already know that surviving it is half the battle. The DMV Line of Despair. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm, which never happens unless something is terribly wrong. My brain had been running simulations all night like a bad Netflix thriller, where every ending involves me packing suitcases at 2 a.m. I dragged myself out of bed, made coffee I didn't taste, and drove to the Virginia Department of Motor Vehicles in Fairfax County, to one everyone calls the Nightmare on Main Street because the line starts forming at 6 a.m. for a 9 a.m. opening. When I pulled into the parking lot at 7:15, I thought I was early. Wrong. There were already 47 people ahead of me. I know it was 47 because I counted them twice, hoping my math was wrong the first time. It wasn't. A man in a stained hoodie sat on a camping chair, drinking Monster Energy like it was his job. A young mom bounced a crying baby on her hip while scrolling through her phone with the other hand. An elderly couple argued in Spanish about which form they needed. And there I was, holding a manila folder with my passport, my expired driver's license, a printout of the I-90 form I'd filled out at 3 a.m., and a desperate hope that someone behind the counter would care. Here's what your brain does when you're standing in a DMV line for hours. It starts lying to you. Cognitive psychology calls this catastrophizing, which is a fancy word for your imagination turning every small problem into a full-blown disaster movie. You know that scene in every horror film where the character walks slowly toward the creepy door and you scream, "Don't go in there." That's your brain, but the door is your future, and you can't look away. By hour 2, I had already imagined 3 different deportation scenarios, each more creative than the last. In the first one, I was handcuffed at work in front of my coworkers. In the second, I was explaining to my 5-year-old why we had to leave her school and her friends and her entire life. In the third, and this one was really cinematic, I was on a plane, staring out the window at the Statue of Liberty shrinking beneath the clouds. None of these things had happened. None of them were even likely to happen. But my brain didn't care. It was bored, and boredom is the enemy of rational thought. See, neuroscientists have discovered that the human brain craves novelty like a drug. When you stick it in a repetitive, boring environment like a DMV line, it starts manufacturing drama just to feel alive. It's the same reason people pick fights with their spouses on long road trips or suddenly remember embarrassing things they did in high school while waiting for coffee. Your brain is essentially throwing a tantrum, saying, "Give me something interesting, or I will invent something terrifying." And standing in that line, surrounded by the smell of cheap perfume and stale donuts. My brain was working overtime. But here's the part of the story I haven't told you yet. I wasn't just any immigrant in that line. I was an immigrant who had let his English skills slide for years. I could order coffee. I could chat with neighbors about the weather. I could watch sitcoms without subtitles. Mostly. But when it came to real, high-stakes conversations, the kind where one wrong word could mean the difference between staying and leaving, my English turned into a wobbly bridge over a very deep canyon. I knew the words lost, green card, replacement, and emergency, but I didn't know how to string them together in a way that sounded competent. I didn't know the right tone to use, not too desperate, not too demanding, and I definitely didn't know the magical phrases that make government employees want to help you instead of handing you a number and moving on to the next person. That's the dirty secret about language learning that no app will tell you. You can study vocabulary lists until your eyes bleed. You can memorize grammar rules like they're sacred texts. But when you're standing in a DMV line, sweating through your shirt, your heart pounding like a drum solo, all that book learning evaporates. What's left is the English you actually own, the words and phrases you've used in real situations, under real pressure, with real consequences. And for me, that was not enough. Not nearly enough. The line moved at the speed of a snail with a broken leg. Every 15 minutes, a bored security guard would poke his head out and shout, "Next." And exactly 3 people would shuffle forward. By hour 3, my legs ached. By hour 3.5, my hope had turned into a kind of numb acceptance. I remember looking at the woman ahead of me, the one with the crying baby, and thinking, she's been here longer than me, and she's not giving up, so shut up and wait. There's a strange camaraderie in DMV lines. Nobody talks, but everybody understands. We're all prisoners of the same broken system, victims of the same underfunded bureaucracy, survivors of the same soul-crushing weight. When I finally reached the front of the line 4 hours and 12 minutes after I arrived, my hands were shaking again. The security guard pointed to window number 7. I walked toward it like a man walking to the gallows, my manila folder clutched to my chest like a shield. The woman behind the counter had short grey hair, reading glasses hanging from a beaded chain around her neck, and the exhausted expression of someone who has seen too many desperate faces and learned not to care. She didn't look up when I approached. She just tapped her keyboard and said, "Number and reason for visit." Her voice was flat, mechanical, like a recording. I opened my mouth and nothing came out. My throat had closed up. The English words I'd been rehearsing for 4 hours, the ones I'd whispered to myself like a prayer, had vanished completely. Not a single syllable remained. She finally looked up, and her eyes met mine. For a moment, just a fraction of a second, I saw something flicker across her face. Was it annoyance, sympathy, curiosity? I couldn't tell. And then she said it again. Slower this time. Number and reason. I handed her my number ticket. My fingers brushed against hers. They were warm. That tiny detail, the warmth of her hands, made me want to cry all over again. Because warmth meant she was human. And if she was human, maybe, just maybe, she would listen. A stranger's eyes. The woman behind the counter had the kind of face you'd expect to see on a weathered mailbox, functional, unremarkable, and slightly beaten by the elements. Her name tag read Brenda, and beneath it, in smaller letters, since 1997, 29 years behind this bulletproof glass, 29 years of lost licenses, failed eye tests, and immigrants like me standing in front of her with trembling hands and crumbling hope. When she first looked at me, her eyes were the color of wet concrete, flat, grey, and completely unrevealing. I've seen that look before. It's the look of someone who has learned, through painful experience, that caring too much is a luxury they can't afford. Psychologists call this compassion fatigue, and it's epidemic among public service workers. Your brain literally rewires itself to stop feeling empathy, because if you felt every person's pain, you'd collapse under the weight of it. So Brenda had built walls. Not mean walls. Not cruel walls, just practical ones. The kind of walls that say, I'll process your paperwork, but don't ask me to feel your panic. And standing there, with my empty mouth and my sweaty palms, I understood. I also hated it, because what I needed in that moment wasn't efficiency. What I needed was a miracle, and miracles don't usually come from government employees named Brenda, who've been staring at computer screens since the Clinton administration. But here's the thing about miracles: they often wear boring clothes and sit on rolling office chairs. You just have to say the right words to wake them up. And I didn't have those words, not yet. Number and reason, she repeated for the third time, and her voice had shifted from mechanical to mildly annoying. That's when I noticed something I hadn't seen before. Behind her reading glasses, behind the beaded chain, behind the concrete-colored eyes, there was a tiny spark. Not warmth, not kindness, something closer to curiosity. Like she was watching a nature documentary about a wounded animal and couldn't decide whether to change the channel. I forced air through my vocal cords and produced a sound that was almost a sentence. I lost my green card last night at the airport. The words came out in chunks, like a broken printer spitting out half-finished pages. My accent, which I usually hide pretty well, suddenly became thick and clumsy. Green sounded like Grieng, card came out as Cardi. I was a walking stereotype of the struggling immigrant, and I hated myself for it. Brenda didn't react. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, waiting. Fill out Form I-90 online, she said. Pay fee. Wait 10 to 12 months. Next. She actually said next, like I was a number. Like my entire future could be reduced to a transaction at Windows 7. That's when something inside me broke. Not the dramatic, movie-style breaking where you scream and punch a wall. The quiet kind. The kind where your shoulders drop, your jaw unclenches, and you suddenly realize you have nothing left to fight with. I stared at the counter between us, scratched plastic, a pen chained to a holder, a stack of blank forms, and I whispered, I have a daughter. She's 5, she was born here. If I can't prove my status, I can't work. And if I can't work, I can't pay for her dance classes. She has a recital in 3 weeks. She's playing a ladybug. I don't know why I said that last part. Maybe because the ladybug costume was red with black spots and she'd been practicing her wiggle dance in the living room every night. Maybe because I needed Brenda to see that I wasn't just a case number. I was a dad who promised his kid she could be a ladybug on stage. And now that promise was balancing on the edge of a missing piece of plastic. For 5 seconds, which felt like 5 years, Brenda didn't move. Her eyes stayed on me. But something shifted behind them. The concrete color seemed to warm. Just a fraction, like sunrise hitting a grey sky. Then she did something unexpected. She pulled her hands away from the keyboard, leaned back in her rolling chair, and removed her reading glasses. The beaded chain clinked softly against the counter. Without those glasses, her face looked different, softer, more human. You're not from around here, she said. Not a question, her statement. I shook my head. Came here 7 years ago. From Vietnam. Well, Saigon, Ho Chi Minh City now. But I still call it Saigon. Brenda nodded slowly, like I'd just confirmed something she already suspected. Then she said, the last thing I expected to hear from a DMV employee in Fairfax County, Virginia. My husband was from Da Nang. The air between us changed. Suddenly, we weren't just a customer and a clerk. We were two people connected by a thread of shared history. Thin as spider silk but strong enough to hold a conversation. He passed 5 years ago. Brenda continued, her voice dropping to something almost private, cancer. But before he got sick, he lost his green card too. Twice. Once at a gas station. Once in a laundromat. Man couldn't keep track of his own shoes, let alone a piece of plastic. She almost smiled, Almost. You want to know what he did? I nodded, not trusting my voice. You cry, she said. Right there in the laundromat, surrounded by dryers and someone's lost sock. Fake, loud, ugly crying, and then he came here. To this DMV, to this window. And do you know what the lady told him? I shook my head. She told him to fill out Form I-90 and wait 10 to 12 months. Brenda paused, letting the irony sink in. So he went home, waited 3 days, and came back with a different strategy. Not better paperwork, a different strategy, because he figured out something that most people never do. She leaned forward, and her eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that made my stomach flip. He figured out that the rules are written to protect the system, not the person, but the people inside the system. Some of them remember what it's like to be a person, and if you can find those people, and if you can say the right words to them, the rules start to bend. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my temples. What words? I asked. Brenda glanced left, then right, checking for supervisors. Then she pulled a sticky note from under her keyboard and wrote something on it. 3 sentences, 12 words total. She slid the note across the counter, face down, like we were exchanging secrets in a spy movie. Call this number, she said. Say exactly what I wrote. Not more, not less. And when they ask if someone helped you, say no. I picked up the sticky note. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely read it. But I saw enough. 3 sentences, simple English. Words I actually knew. And suddenly, for the first time since baggage claim, I felt something other than panic. I felt something dangerous. I felt hope. I lost everything. The sticky note in my hand felt heavier than paper had any right to feel. 3 sentences, 12 words. A lifeline written in blue ink on a yellow square that probably came from a 500 pack bought at Staples in 2019. I stood there at window 7, clutching that note like a drowning man clutches a rope, and Brenda was already turning back to her computer screen, her reading glasses back on her nose, her concrete-colored eyes already looking past me to the next person in line. But I couldn't leave. Not yet. My feet had grown roots into the dirty carpet, because I had just realized something terrible. I didn't understand one of the sentences. It was short, simple, 7 words. But one of those words had 2 meanings, and I didn't know which meaning Brenda intended. And if I called that number and said the wrong thing, if my English failed me one more time, the rope would snap. Brenda, I said, and my voice cracked like a teenager's. She didn't look up. Brenda, please. Something in my tone made her pause. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. She sighed that deep, exhausted sigh of someone who has given more than they planned to give and turned back toward me. What? Not mean, just tired. I unfolded the sticky note and pointed to the second sentence. This word, file, does it mean like a folder? Or does it mean to submit something? Because in my language, we have 2 different words. I don't want to make mistake. Brenda stared at me for a long moment. Then she did something that made my chest ache. She laughed, not a mean laugh. A surprised laugh. Like I'd just said something unexpectedly honest. You're worried about a word, she said. You lost your green card. You're facing possible deportation, and you're worried about a word. I nodded, because the word is the difference between getting help and getting a form letter. That's when Brenda's face changed. The concrete warmed into something closer to sandstone, still rough, still weathered, but no longer cold. She pulled her chair closer to the glass and spoke slowly, deliberately, like someone teaching a child to tie their shoes. In this context, file means to submit, to send in, to officially give paperwork to the government. It's a verb here, not a noun. Say I need to file a report. Not I need the file. Got it? I repeated the sentence back to her, carefully shaping each sound. I need to file a report about my lost green card. Brenda nodded. Better. Now say it again. but slower, and pretend you're talking to someone you've known for years. The calmer you sound, the more they'll listen. So I said it again and again and again. 4 times, 5 times, 6 times. While the line behind me grew longer and more impatient, I could feel their eyes on my back like needles. But Brenda didn't rush me. She just sat there, tapping her keyboard occasionally to look busy, while I practiced those 12 words until they stopped feeling like foreign sounds and started feeling like mine. This is the secret that no language app will ever teach you. You don't learn words by memorizing flashcards. You learn them by needing them, by standing at a DMV counter, humiliated and desperate, and repeating a sentence until your tongue memorizes the shape of it. Neuroscientists call this context-dependent memory. Your brain doesn't just store the word. It stores the emotion, the setting, the smell of stale coffee, and the scratch of the pen against the sticky note. And later, when you're in a similar situation, those words come back to you not as abstract symbols but as survival tools. That's why immigrants often speak better English during emergencies than during casual conversations. Because emergencies don't give you time to be self-conscious. They just demand that you communicate. Or else, after the 7th repetition, Brenda held up her hand. Enough. You've got it. Now go home. Make the call. And for the love of God, don't mention my name. I stuffed the sticky note into my pocket, next to my phone, but I still couldn't leave, because there was one more thing I needed to say, and the words were stuck somewhere between my heart and my throat. Brenda, I said, my daughter, the ladybug recital. She doesn't know about any of this. She thinks I'm at work. She thinks everything is fine. My voice broke on the word fine. Brenda's eyes softened. Just a little, just enough. Then make sure everything stays fine, she said. Make the call, say the words. And when your daughter does her wiggle dance on that stage, you send me a video. I blinked. How? I don't have your number. I don't even know your last name. Brenda smiled. It was the first real smile I'd seen from her, and it transformed her entire face. You don't need my number. You need to remember this. A stranger helped you once. Someday, you'll see someone else standing where you're standing now. And when you do, you'll help them. That's how it works. That's how it's always worked. She turned back to her computer screen. The reading glasses went back on. The concrete eyes returned. Next, she said. And just like that, I was dismissed. I walked out of that DMV with my manila folder, my sticky note, and a heart full of something I hadn't felt in 24 hours. Not relief. Not yet. But something close. Something that felt like a door cracking open when I thought all the doors had been sealed shut. I sat in my car for a long time, staring at the sticky note. 12 words. 3 sentences. And one of them was a question I'd never thought to ask, the question that would change everything. But I didn't know that yet. All I knew was that I had to make a phone call, and my English had to be good enough. Not perfect, just good enough. And for the first time since baggage claim, I believed it might be. The pause that changed everything. Before I left that DMV, before Brenda handed me the sticky note, before I practiced those 12 words until my tongue ached, there was a pause so small that most people would have missed it. But I didn't, because in that pause, the entire universe shifted. Let me rewind about 4 minutes. I had just told Brenda about my daughter's ladybug recital. My voice was cracking, my hands were shaking, and Brenda, tired, grey-haired, concrete-eyed Brenda, had done something unexpected. She had stopped typing. Not the kind of stop where you pause to think. The kind of stop where you consciously decide that the keyboard can wait because a human being is falling apart in front of you and maybe, just maybe, you're the only one who can catch them. She pushed her stack of paperwork to the side. Not dramatically. Not like a movie hero pushing aside files to reveal a hidden microphone. Just a slow, deliberate slide of her wrist. clearing a small space on her cluttered desk. Then she took off her reading glasses again. The beaded chain clinked. She set the glasses down on top of the papers, folded her hands on the cleared space, and looked straight into my eyes. Not at my forehead, not at my mouth, into my eyes. And what I saw there made my breath catch, because behind the exhaustion, behind the government-issued indifference, behind the 29 years of next please, there was something raw, something that looked exactly like me. I used to be like you, she said. Her voice was quiet, almost a whisper, but in that noisy DMV, with babies crying and printers humming and numbers being called every few seconds, her voice was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. I used to stand in front of counters just like this one, with my heart in my throat, praying that the person behind the glass would see me as a human instead of a problem. I blinked. You were an immigrant. Brenda shook her head slowly. No, but my mother was. And I watched her go through exactly what you're going through right now. The lost documents, the sleepless nights, the way her hands would shake whenever she had to talk to an official. I was 12 years old, translating for her at the DMV, at the Social Security office, at the hospital. 12 years old, and I already knew words like affidavit and jurisdiction, because someone had to explain to my mother why her application was denied again. She paused, and for a moment, her eyes drifted to somewhere far away. She came here from El Salvador in 1985, spoke almost no English, worked 3 jobs cleaning houses so I could go to school. And one day, she lost her work authorization card, just like you lost your green card. It fell out of her purse somewhere between the bus stop and the 5th floor of an office building where she was scrubbing toilets. Brenda's voice cracked, just slightly. She cried for 3 days. Didn't eat. Didn't sleep, just sat at the kitchen table, staring at nothing, while I made her coffee she never drank. And do you know what saved her? I shook my head. A stranger, a woman at the DMV who saw my mother's face and recognized something. Not pity, recognition. That woman pulled my mother aside, spoke to her in slow, simple Spanish, and told her exactly what forms to file and what words to say. No shortcuts, no magic tricks, just clear, honest instructions from someone who had been there herself. Brenda picked up her glasses, turned them over in her hands, and set them back down. That woman didn't have to help. She could have handed my mother a number and moved on to the next person. But she didn't, and because she didn't, my mother kept her status, kept her job, kept sending me to school. And 20 years later, I became the first person in my family to graduate from college. Then I got this job at this DMV, behind this window. She looked at me and her eyes were wet. Not crying, just wet. I've been here for 29 years. I've seen thousands of people like you. Thousands, and most of them, I process their paperwork and forget their faces by lunchtime. But some of them, the ones who remind me of my mother, those faces stay. You want to know why I'm telling you this? I nodded, unable to speak, because I need you to understand something. The system is not fair. It was never designed to be fair. It was designed to be efficient. And efficiency does not care about your daughter's ladybug recital, or your mother's 3 jobs, or the panic in your chest when you realize you've lost the one piece of plastic that proves you exist. The system will eat you alive if you let it. But the people inside the system, some of us remember what it's like to be chewed up and spit out. And those of us who remember, we leave cracks in the wall, small ones, just big enough for someone like you to squeeze through. She pulled a sticky note from her drawer and clicked her pen. I'm going to write down 3 sentences, 12 words. If you say them exactly as written, the person on the other end of the phone will transfer you to a department that doesn't exist in the public directory. That department has people who can expedite your replacement card in 48 hours instead of 12 months. But you have to say the words exactly. Not almost exactly, exactly. Do you understand? I nodded again, my throat too tight for words. Brenda wrote. Her handwriting was small and neat, like a teacher's. Then she slid the note across the counter, face down. "Don't read it here," she said. "Go home, sit somewhere quiet. Practice out loud until you don't have to think about the words anymore. And then make the call. And when it works, when you hang up that phone and you know you're safe, you remember this moment. You remember that a stranger who had no reason to care decided to care anyway. And then you do the same for someone else someday." I picked up the note. My fingers brushed against hers again, warm. Still warm. "Why me?" I asked. "Why not the person before me, or the person after?" Brenda almost smiled. "Because you mentioned your daughter. Because you mentioned the ladybug recital. Because when you said those words, you stopped being a case number and started being a person. And I've learned that people who love someone that much, they don't give up. They fight. And fighters are worth helping." She put her reading glasses back on. The concrete eyes returned. The keyboard clicked back to life. "Next," she said. And the magic was over. But the pause, that small, infinite pause where she pushed aside her paperwork and looked into my soul, that pause stayed with me. It stayed with me in the car. It stayed with me on the drive home. It stayed with me while I practiced those 12 words in my empty living room. My daughter still at school. My wife still at work. And when I finally made the call, it was Brenda's face I saw. Not her name. Not her advice. Just her face. And the crack she had left in the wall. Her own immigration story. I almost walked away. I had the sticky note in my pocket. 3 sentences that might save my life. And Brenda was already calling next to the person behind me. But something made me stay. Maybe it was the way her hands had trembled when she mentioned her mother. Maybe it was the crack in her voice when she said the words affidavit and jurisdiction. Or maybe it was just that I hadn't eaten in 24 hours and my brain was too tired to tell my feet to move. Whatever it was, I didn't leave. I stood there at window 7, clutching the edge of the counter like a child holding onto a parent's hand in a crowd. And I asked the question that had been burning in my chest since she first mentioned El Salvador. "What happened to your mother?" Brenda's hand froze mid-reach for the next person's paperwork. For a moment, I thought she was going to ignore me. Her jaw tightened. Her eyes flicked toward the security camera in the corner. Then she exhaled a long, slow breath that seemed to carry the weight of decades, and she pulled her hand back. "She died," Brenda said, not coldly, just flatly, like she had said these words so many times that they had worn smooth, like river stones. "Pancreatic cancer. 2014. She was 68. I opened my mouth to say I was sorry, but Brenda held up her hand. "Don't. She had a good life. A hard life. But a good one. She got to see me graduate college. She got to see me get this job. She got to see me marry a man from Da Nang, which she never understood because she didn't speak Vietnamese, and he didn't speak Spanish. But they loved each other anyway. They used to communicate through hand gestures and bad Google translations." A ghost of a smile crossed Brenda's face. He called her mama and she called him Mihiho, and somehow they made it work. I found myself smiling too, despite everything. "That's beautiful," Brenda shrugged. "It was messy. Immigration is always messy. But here's what I learned from watching my mother fight for 30 years to stay in a country that never fully accepted her. The system doesn't care about your love story. It doesn't care about your hand gestures, or your bad Google translations, or the way your heart breaks every time you hear your child speak English better than you. The system cares about paperwork, deadlines, fees, forms filled out in triplicate." She picked up her reading glasses again, turned them over, set them down. "But the people inside the system, some of us remember that behind every form is a person. And some of us are willing to bend the rules just enough to let that person through." I leaned closer to the glass. "Is that what you're doing for me? Bending the rules?" Brenda's eyes met mine. And for the first time, I saw something other than exhaustion or recognition. I saw fear. I'm giving you information, she said carefully. Information that is technically available to the public. If you know where to look, what you do with that information is your business. What you say on the phone is your choice. And if anyone asks you where you got this number, you tell them you found it on a Reddit forum from 2022. Do you understand? I nodded. Reddit, 2022. Got it. Brenda relaxed slightly. Good. Now here's the part I didn't write on the note. The part you need to understand before you make that call. She paused, choosing her words like a jeweler selecting diamonds. The people in that department, the ones who can expedite your green card, they're not miracle workers. They're overworked federal employees who process thousands of requests a month. Most of them have been doing this job for so long that they've forgotten why they started. But some of them still remember. And the ones who remember, they're looking for signals. Signals, I repeated. Signals that you're not just another person who lost their card because they were careless. Signals that you're someone who actually needs help. Someone who will use that green card to build a life. Contribute to this country. Raise children who will grow up to do the same. They don't want to help the person who lost their card in a nightclub because they were drunk and stupid. They want to help the person who lost their card at the airport because they were rushing home to see their daughter's ladybug recital. My eyes stung. How do they know the difference? Brenda leaned forward, a voice dropping to barely a whisper. Because you show them, not with words, with your voice. With the way you say please and thank you and I'm so sorry to bother you, with the tiny crack in your tone when you mention your daughter's name. These people have heard thousands of calls. They can smell desperation from a mile away. But they can also smell sincerity, and sincerity real, honest, and just a scared parent trying to do the right thing. Sincerity, that's the only thing that opens doors. She reached under her counter and pulled out a small, worn photograph. It showed a young woman in a graduation cap and gown, standing next to an older woman with the same tight eyes Brenda had. The older woman was smiling, really smiling, like she had just won the lottery and found $100 bill on the ground in the same day. That's me and my mother, Brenda said, tapping the photograph. 1995, my college graduation. She worked 3 jobs to pay for that cap and gown. 3 jobs, 7 days a week. For 4 years. And when I walked across that stage, she stood up and cheered so loud that the dean actually asked her to sit down. Brenda's voice cracked. She was so proud. But you know what she said to me afterward? She pulled me aside, away from the crowd, and she said, Brenda, don't ever forget, you're not just graduating for yourself. You're graduating for every immigrant who stood in a line like I did. You're graduating for the ones who made it and the ones who didn't. You carry all of us with you now. A tear slipped down Brenda's cheek. She wiped it away quickly, almost angrily, like she was embarrassed to be seen crying. I've been carrying all of them for 30 years. Every immigrant who stands at this window, every lost green card, every panicked phone call, I carry them. And some days, it's heavy. Some days, I want to quit. Some days, I want to put up a sign that says, go away. I'm done helping. But then someone like you shows up. Someone who mentions their daughter's ladybug recital. Someone whose hands shake when they hand me their paperwork. Someone who looks at me like I'm their last hope. And I remember why I'm still here. She slid the photograph back under the counter. So here's what I need you to do. Go home, practice those 12 words, make the call. And when you hang up, whether it works or not, you promise me something. Anything. I said. Brenda looked at me with those concrete-colored eyes. And for just a moment, they weren't concrete at all. They were warm. They were human. They were exactly what I needed them to be. Promise me you won't forget, she said. Promise me that someday, when you're standing behind some counter, maybe literally, maybe just in life, you'll look for someone who needs what you needed today, and you'll help them. Not because you have to, because you remember. I promised. And then, finally, I left. The hidden system. I didn't go straight home. I drove to a park near my house. The one with the oak tree where my daughter likes to collect acorns. And I sat on a bench with the sticky note in my hand. 3 sentences, 12 words. But Brenda had hinted at something bigger, something she hadn't written down. A hidden system. A crack in the wall that most people never find because most people don't know where to look. I stared at the note. But my mind kept drifting back to something Brenda had said just as I was leaving. The information I gave you isn't illegal, she had whispered, her hand on the glass. It's just invisible. Most DMV employees don't even know this exists because the training manual doesn't mention it. But I've been here 29 years. I've read every regulation, every memo, every obscure policy update that gets buried in some internal server. And once in a while, you find something that was never meant to be hidden, it just got lost. Buried under layers of bureaucracy and bad communication. She had pulled out a worn 3-ring binder from under her desk. The kind with a cracked spine and coffee stains on the cover. This is my Bible, she said. I started it in 1997. Every time I found a rule that could help someone, a waiver, an exception, a loophole that wasn't really a loophole, but just a procedure nobody uses, I wrote it down. Over the years, I've added hundreds of pages, and most of them I'll never use, but every once in a while, someone comes along who needs exactly the page I've been saving. She flipped through the binder until she found a specific page. Dog-eared and highlighted in yellow. Read this, she said, turning the binder toward the glass so I could see. I pressed my face against the partition, squinting at the tiny text. It was a section of the Code of Federal Regulations, Title 8, something about emergency travel documents and replacement of lost permanent resident cards under extraordinary circumstances. I didn't understand half of it. The language was thick, dense, designed by lawyers for lawyers. That one paragraph had been circled in red pen. If an applicant can demonstrate that the loss of their Form I-551 permanent resident card occurred under circumstances that were not attributable to negligence or willful disregard, and that the applicant has an urgent need for proof of status within 72 hours due to employment, medical, or family obligations, the district office may, in its discretion, issue temporary evidence of status pending replacement. I read it 3 times, sounding out each word slowly because my English still wasn't fast enough to process legal jargon at normal speed. What does that mean? I asked. Brenda's eyes sparkled. It means that if you can prove you weren't being careless, that you lost your card because of something outside your control, and if you have a good reason to need it back fast, they can give you temporary proof within 3 days. Not 12 months. 3 days. My heart raced. How do I prove I wasn't careless? You don't, Brenda said. You let them prove that you were. And they can't, because you weren't. You lost your card at an airport, not a bar. You were traveling for a family visit, not a vacation. You have a child who needs you to work. These are facts. Facts are your friends. She tapped the binder. The problem is, most people don't know this rule exists, and most DMV employees don't either. So, and someone comes in with a lost green card, they default to the standard procedure. File I-90. Wait 12 months. But the standard procedure isn't the only procedure. It's just the easiest one. And government employees, like everyone else, tend to take the easiest path. That was the hidden system, not a conspiracy. Not corruption, just ignorance. Thousands of immigrants every year, standing in lines just like mine, being told there was only one way forward when there were actually 3 or 4 or 5. But no one had shown them the binder. No one had circled the paragraphs in red pen. No one had spent 29 years collecting the forgotten rules and handing them out like breadcrumbs to the desperate. I sat on that park bench, under the oak tree with the acorns, and I thought about all the people who had stood at window 7 before me. How many of them had Brenda helped? How many had she sent away with a sticky note and a whispered prayer? And how many had she watched walk out the door, defeated, because she couldn't save everyone. The system is designed to be confusing, Brenda had said as I finally turned to leave. That's not an accident. Confused people give up. They pay fees they don't need to pay. They wait months for things that could take days. They accept no as the final answer, because they don't know that no is just the beginning of the conversation. She had handed me a second piece of paper, a photocopy of that page from the CFR, with the circled paragraph and her handwritten notes in the margins. When you call that number, don't mention this regulation right away. First, tell them your story. Make them see your daughter's face. Make them hear the panic in your voice. And then, when they start to give you the standard file I-90 and wait answer, you say these exact words. I understand the standard procedure, but I believe my situation qualifies for an emergency adjudication and 8 CFR 264. 5e. I had repeated the citation back to her until I could say it without stumbling. 8 CFR 264.5 parentheses e. It sounded like a spell. In a way, it was. A spell made of numbers and letters that could open doors that had been locked for years. Now, sitting on that bench, I pulled out my phone and searched for 8 CFR 264. 5e just to make sure it was real. It was. There it was, on the official government website, written in the same dense legal language Brenda had shown me. I read it again. Slowly, and this time I understood more. Not everything, but enough. Enough to know that Brenda hadn't lied. Enough to know that the hidden system wasn't hidden at all, it was just buried. Buried under decades of paperwork, under the weight of a bureaucracy that had grown so large it had forgotten its own limbs. I thought about all the people who had lost their green cards before me. How many of them had been told 12 months and simply accepted it? How many had sold their cars, withdrawn their kids from school, started packing suitcases because they didn't know there was another way? And how many had stood at window 7, looking into Brenda's tired eyes, and walked away with nothing but a number? I folded the sticky note and the photocopy together and tucked them into my wallet, the new wallet I bought that morning, because my old one was still somewhere in Chicago. Then I started the car and drove home. I had a phone call to make, and for the first time in 2 days, I wasn't afraid of the words. I was afraid of what might happen if I said them wrong, but I wasn't afraid of the words themselves. Brenda had made sure of that. 48 hours of hope. I walked into my apartment at 11:47 a.m., locked the door behind me, and leaned against it like I was bracing for a hurricane. The sticky note was still in my hand, slightly crumpled now. The blue ink smudged from my sweaty fingers. 3 sentences, 12 words, and a citation I had memorized but didn't fully understand. 8 CFR 264. 5e. I had 48 hours. That's what Brenda had said, not officially, not in writing. But in that whisper as I was leaving, she had added one final instruction. Call today. Not tomorrow. Not next week. Today. Because the clock is already ticking, and the people in that department only work Monday through Thursday. If you call on Friday, you'll have to wait until Monday. And by then, the window might close. I didn't know what window she meant. I didn't ask. Some questions are better left unasked when the answers might terrify you. So I stood in my living room, still wearing my jacket, still holding my car keys, and I stared at my phone like it was a bomb that might explode if I touched it wrong. My wife was at work. My daughter was at school. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of a lawnmower somewhere outside. And in that silence, I did something that felt both ridiculous and necessary. I practiced, not just the 12 words, everything. I practiced picking up the phone. I practiced dialing the number. I practiced taking a breath before speaking. I practiced the pause between sentences. I practiced saying hello without sounding like I was about to cry. I practiced saying my name clearly. I practiced the phrase I'm calling about a lost green card at least 20 times, each time adjusting the tone, the speed, the emphasis. Too fast and I would sound nervous. Too slow and I would sound unsure. Too loud and I would sound aggressive. Too quiet and they wouldn't hear me at all. There's a concept in language learning called automaticity. It's the moment when a word or phrase moves from your conscious memory into your subconscious when you stop thinking about how to say it and just say it. Athletes call it being in the zone. Musicians call it muscle memory. Neuroscientists call it procedural memory consolidation, which is just a fancy way of saying that your brain has built a neural pathway so strong that the information travels along it without any effort. Most people think automaticity comes from repetition. And it does. But not just any repetition. The kind of repetition that happens under pressure. The kind where your brain knows that if you get it wrong, something real is at stake. That's why actors learn their lines faster during dress rehearsal than during table reads. That's why soldiers remember their training in combat. That's why I stood in my living room for 2 hours, saying those 12 words over and over, until my mouth moved without my permission. At 1:30 p.m., I ate a banana. I didn't taste it. At 2 p.m., I called my wife and told her I had a headache and would pick up our daughter from school. I didn't tell her about the green card. I couldn't, not yet. The shame was still too thick, too sticky. At 2:45 p.m., I picked up my daughter from kindergarten. She ran to me with a drawing she had made, a ladybug, obviously, with 8 legs and a smile that took up half its face. Daddy, look, Miss Chen said it's the best ladybug in the whole class. I hugged her so tight she squirmed. It's perfect, I said. And it was. At 3:30 p.m., we went home. I made her a peanut butter sandwich and watched her eat it while telling me about her day, about a boy named Liam who had thrown a crayon, about the class hamster that had escaped for 15 minutes, about the song they learned, about the weather. I nodded and smiled and said wow and really, and tell me more, while my phone sat on the kitchen counter, glowing like a beacon. At 4:15 p.m., my daughter fell asleep on the couch, clutching her ladybug drawing. I covered her with a blanket, kissed her forehead, and walked into the bedroom. I closed the door. I sat on the edge of the bed. I picked up my phone, and then I put it down. Picked it up. Put it down 7 times. On the 8th try, I didn't put it down. I dialed the number Brenda had given me. It rang once, twice, 3 times. A recording answered. Thank you for calling the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services. Your call is important to us. Please listen carefully as our menu options have changed. A menu. Of course there was a menu. Press 1 for English. Press 2 for Spanish. Press 3 for everything else. I pressed 1. Please listen carefully to the following options. Press for 4K status. Press 5 for forms. Press 6 for appointments. Press 0 for the operator. I pressed 0. All operators are currently busy. Please stay on the line. Your estimated wait time is 27 minutes. 27 minutes. I could do that. I had done for hours at the DMV. 27 minutes was nothing. Except it was everything, because those 27 minutes gave my brain time to invent new catastrophes. What if the operator didn't believe me? What if I said the words wrong? What if Brenda had made a mistake? What if the hidden system had been closed? What if the phone played generic classical music, the kind they use in elevators and dentist offices? I paced the bedroom. I stared out the window. I checked on my daughter 3 times. At exactly the 24-minute mark, a human voice broke through the music. USCIS, this is Maria. What's your case number? I didn't have a case number. I had a story. I had 12 words. I had a citation I barely understood. And I had a promise to a DMV lady who had taken a risk on me. Hello, Maria said again. Do you have a case number? I opened my mouth and the words came out. Not perfectly, not smoothly, but they came out. And somewhere in Virginia, at a DMV that had already closed for the day, Brenda was probably driving home in her old Honda, listening to the radio, unaware that her 48 hours of hope had just begun to pay off. But I didn't know that yet. All I knew was that Maria had stopped talking, and I was still talking, and the world hadn't ended. The call that worked. Maria didn't hang up. That was the first miracle. The second miracle was that I was still talking, not fluently, not beautifully, but coherently. The 12 words Brenda had written were gone now, abandoned somewhere between the fourth and fifth rings, replaced by something messier and more honest. I lost my green card, I said, and my voice cracked on the word green. At the airport, 2 days ago. I have a daughter. She's 5. She has a recital, ladybug. I can't work without my card. I can't drive. I can't. I stopped because my throat had closed up again. The same way it had at window 7. The same way it had in the parking garage. The same way it had every time I tried to explain this nightmare to someone who might actually have the power to help. There was silence on the line, not the cold silence of someone waiting for you to finish. The thoughtful silence of someone processing. I could hear Maria breathing, a keyboard clicking in the background, the faint murmur of other operators handling other calls, other disasters, other people whose lives had been reduced to a 10-minute phone conversation with a stranger. Then Maria spoke, and her voice had changed. The professional flatness was gone, replaced by something softer, something almost human. Sir, I need you to take a breath. Just one. In through your nose, out through your mouth. Can you do that for me? I did. It wasn't a deep breath. It was shaky and uneven, and it caught in my chest halfway through. But it was a breath. Good, Maria said. Now tell me again, but this time, start with your name. Just your name, nothing else. My name is. And I said my name, not my American name. The one I used at Starbucks and on job applications. My real name. The one my mother gave me. The one that felt like home. Thank you, Maria said. Now tell me where you're calling from. Virginia. Fairfax County. My apartment. My daughter is sleeping on the couch. She drew a ladybug today. Her recital is in 3 weeks. She's been practicing her wiggle dance every night. If I can't prove my status, I can't work. If I can't work, I can't pay for the recital costume. It's $80. I already put down a deposit. I was rambling. I knew I was rambling, but I couldn't stop because stopping meant silence, and silence meant the call might end. And if the call ended, I might never get the courage to dial again. Maria let me ramble. She didn't interrupt. She didn't say, sir, please stick to the facts, or I need your case number, or any of the other phrases I had feared. She just listened. And when I finally ran out of words, when my voice gave out completely, and all I could do was sit there with the phone pressed to my ear, breathing into the receiver like a wounded animal, Maria said something I will never forget. I have a daughter too, she said. She's 7. She was in a recital last month. Ballet. She was a bunny. Pink costume, floppy ears. She forgot the routine halfway through and just started spinning in circles on stage. Maria laughed, a small, private laugh. It was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. I laughed too. It came out wet and broken. More sob than laugh. And it was real. The ladybug costume has spots, I said. Red with black spots. She picked it herself. She tried on 3 different ones and walked around the store in each one, doing her wiggle dance, asking every stranger she passed, do I look like a ladybug? Maria was quiet for a moment. Then she said, what's your daughter's name? I told her, and in that moment, Something shifted. I could feel it through the phone, through the miles of fiber optic cable and satellite signals and whatever else connects a desperate father in Virginia to a federal operator in Nebraska. Maria wasn't just processing a request anymore. She was a person, talking to another person, about the things that actually mattered. "Here's what I need you to do," Maria said. And her voice had shifted again from soft to focused, from compassionate to competent. "I need you to tell me exactly what happened. Not the emotional part, the factual part. Where did you lose the card? When did you notice? What did you do after?" I told her. "Chicago O'Hare. United flight from Denver. Baggage claim." The moment I patted my empty pocket, the lost and found report I filed online at 2 a.m. The DMV this morning. I didn't mention Brenda. I didn't mention the sticky note or the binder or the circled paragraph. I just gave Maria the facts, stripped of everything except what she needed to know. "Okay," Maria said when I finished. "I'm pulling up your file now. Give me a moment." The keyboard clicked. I held my breath. 30 seconds passed, 40, 50, a minute. Then Maria said something that made my heart stop. "Sir, do you know what 8 CFR 264? 5 years. My mouth went dry. Brenda's words echoed in my head. "Don't mention the regulation right away. Wait until they give you the standard answer." That Maria was asking me directly. She was testing me, or maybe she was helping me. I couldn't tell which. "It's a regulation," I said carefully, "about emergency replacement of lost green cards. Under extraordinary circumstances." Another pause. Then Maria said, very quietly, "Who told you about that?" My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my temples. "I found it online," I said. "Read it. A forum from 2022. Brenda would have been proud." Maria didn't respond for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Most people don't know about that regulation. Most people call us. We tell them to file I-90. And they hang up and wait 12 months. But every once in a while, someone calls who knows the right questions to ask. And when that happens, I'm allowed to do something I'm not usually allowed to do." "What's that?" I asked. "Transfer you to the emergency adjudications team. They work Monday through Thursday. Today is Wednesday. If I transfer you now, and if they agree that your situation qualifies, you could have temporary proof of status in 48 hours. 48 hours. Brenda's words exactly. "Why would you do that for me?" I asked. "Because you mentioned your daughter's recital," Maria said. "Because you told me her name. Because you laughed when I told you about my daughter spinning in circles on stage. Because you're not just a case number. You're a dad who wants to see his kid be a ladybug. And I'm a mom who understands that." She paused. "Now, I'm going to transfer you. When the next person answers, you tell them exactly what you told me. The facts, the recital, the ladybug, and you mention the regulation 8 CFR 264. 5E. But only after you've told your story. Do you understand?" "I understand," I said. "Thank you, Maria." "Don't thank me yet," she said. "Thank me when you're watching your daughter wiggle on that stage." The line clicked, music played, I waited, and somewhere in Virginia, on a couch covered in a blanket, my daughter slept, holding her ladybug drawing, dreaming of spots and dances and a father who hadn't yet told her that everything was going to be okay. But he was about to. Learning English through fear. The transfer music lasted for minutes. For minutes of generic hold music that sounded like someone playing a keyboard with their elbows. But those 4 minutes changed everything, because when a human voice finally came back on the line, a man this time, older, with a voice like gravel and coffee, he didn't ask for my case number. He didn't ask for my number. He asked one question. "Tell me about the ladybug." And just like that, I understood something that no textbook had ever taught me. Fear is the greatest language teacher in the world. Not flashcards, not apps, not grammar drills. Fear. Because fear doesn't care if your accent is perfect. Fear doesn't care if you conjugate your verbs correctly. Fear only cares about one thing: getting the message across before it's too late. That's the secret that every immigrant knows and every language learner discovers eventually. You don't really learn a language until you need it, until your survival depends on it, until the words are the only thing standing between you and disaster. And standing in that apartment, with my daughter sleeping on the couch and a USCIS officer waiting on the line, I needed English more than I had ever needed anything in my life. The man's name was David. He worked in the emergency adjudications team, the one that most callers never reach. He had been doing this job for 17 years, and he had heard every story imaginable. Lost green cards, expired visas, stolen passports, families separated by paperwork. But he had never heard about a ladybug recital before. "Go ahead," David said. "Take your time. Tell me what happened." So I told him. Not in perfect English. Not in beautiful sentences. In broken, halting, desperate English that stumbled over itself like a toddler learning to walk. I told him about the flight from Denver, the wallet in my back pocket, the moment I realized it was gone, the panic in the parking garage, the DMV line, the woman at window 7. I didn't mention Brenda's name, but I mentioned her eyes, her tired face, the way she had listened when I mentioned my daughter. I told him about the sticky note, the 12 words, the citation I had memorized. And through all of it, David didn't interrupt. He didn't correct my grammar. He didn't ask me to repeat myself. He just listened. And when I finally stopped, out of breath and out of words, David said something that made me cry. "Your English is fine," he said. "You think it's bad because you're comparing yourself to native speakers. But I've been doing this job for 17 years. I've taught 2,000 of immigrants, and the ones who speak the most perfect English are usually the ones who are hiding something, the ones who stumble, the ones who pause to find the right word, the ones who say and I'm sorry. How do you say this? Those are the ones telling the truth. Because fear doesn't let you lie. Fear makes you honest." That was the moment I stopped being ashamed of my English. Not because I had suddenly become fluent, because I realized that fluency was never the goal. The goal was connection. And connection doesn't require perfect grammar. It requires something much simpler: courage. The next 48 hours were the longest of my life. "Check your email tomorrow afternoon," he said. "If you don't see anything by 5 p.m., call this direct line. Not the main number. This number." He gave me a 10-digit number that I wrote on the back of Brenda's sticky note. Then he hung up, and I was alone again with my fear. But something had changed. The fear was still there. It would be there until I had that piece of paper in my hands, but it had been joined by something else. Something that felt like momentum. Like I was moving forward instead of standing still. And in that strange space between hope and terror, I did something I had never done before. I started paying attention to English. Not studying it, paying attention to it. The difference is everything. Studying is passive. It's sitting with a textbook, memorizing vocabulary, doing exercises. Paying attention is active. It's noticing the way your barista says "have a nice day" with a rising intonation that makes it sound like a question. It's listening to the news anchor's choice of words and realizing she uses devastating for storms but tragic for accidents. It's hearing your daughter say "I'm done with my sandwich" instead of "I finished my sandwich," and understanding that done implies a feeling of relief, not just completion. Neuroscientists call this noticing hypothesis. It's the theory that you don't acquire a new language by being taught rules. You acquire it by noticing how native speakers actually use the language in real situations. And nothing makes you notice like fear. Because fear sharpens your senses. It makes you hyper-aware of every word, every tone, every pause. Your brain goes into survival mode. And in survival mode, language stops being an abstract subject and starts being a tool, a hammer, a rope, a ladder. I started listening to everything. The checkout lady at Safeway, the bus driver who announced stops in a monotone, the mum at the playground who called her son Buddy instead of his name. I repeated their phrases under my breath, testing them on my tongue, feeling the shape of each word. Buddy, come here, paper or plastic. Next stop, Maple Avenue. These weren't textbook sentences. They were real. They were alive, and they were teaching me more in 2 days than 6 months of Duolingo had. At night, after my daughter went to bed, I sat in the dark with my phone and watched YouTube videos. Not English lessons, just videos, cooking videos, home renovation videos, a guy restoring an old tractor in his barn. I didn't understand every word. I didn't need to. I was listening for patterns, the way people interrupted each other, the way they laughed at their own mistakes, the way they said when they were thinking. And slowly, without realizing it, I was learning. Not the English of textbooks, the English of real life, the English of fear and hope and ladybug recitals. On the second day, I checked my email 47 times. I'm not exaggerating. I counted 47 times between 8 a.m. and 5 p.m. Nothing. At 4:58 p.m., 2 minutes before David's deadline, my phone buzzed. An email from USCIS. Subject line: temporary evidence of status. Approval notice. I opened it with shaking hands, and there it was. A PDF, a letter, a piece of paper that said, in official government language, that I was allowed to stay, allowed to work, allowed to drive, allowed to be a dad who could afford an $80 ladybug costume. I printed the letter on our old printer, the one that always jams. It printed perfectly on the first try. I held the paper in my hands and read it 3 times. Then I walked into the living room, where my daughter was watching cartoons, and I sat down next to her on the couch. "Daddy's okay," I said. She looked at me, puzzled. "Were you not okay?" I laughed. "I'm okay now," I said. "I'm really okay now." She nodded, satisfied, and turned back to her cartoon. She didn't understand what had happened. She didn't need to. That was the whole point. The envelope arrives, the temporary letter was enough. That's what I told myself for the next 3 weeks. It was enough to work, enough to drive, enough to prove my status if anyone asked. It was printed on cheap paper with a faded USCIS logo, and it looked like something a teenager might have made on Canva. But it was official. It had a stamp, a signature, a barcode. It was enough. Except it wasn't, because the temporary letter expired in 60 days, and somewhere in the back of my mind, a clock was ticking. I had filed the I-90 form, paid the $540 fee, and submitted my passport photos. The receipt said processing time, 8 to 12 months. But Brenda had taught me that processing times were suggestions, not rules. Maria had taught me that the right words could open doors. And David had taught me that fear was a better teacher than any textbook. So I waited, but I didn't wait passively. I waited actively. Every morning, I checked the USCIS case status website. Every morning, the same message. Case is being reviewed. Every morning, I closed my laptop and went about my day. I took my daughter to school. I went to work. I came home. I made dinner. I read bedtime stories. I practiced English by listening to podcasts while I washed dishes. And every night, before I fell asleep, I said a quiet thank you to Brenda, whose last name I still didn't know. 3 weeks passed. The ladybug recital came and went. My daughter did her wiggle dance on stage, and the audience applauded. and I cried so hard that the woman next to me offered me a tissue. I sent a video to the email address Brenda had written on a separate sticky note, the one she'd said I could use if something good happens. I didn't know if she would watch it. I didn't know if she still worked at that DMV, or if she had retired, or if she had been transferred to another window. But I sent it anyway, with a subject line that said Ladybug Recital. Thank you. She never replied. That was fine. Some thanks don't need replies. Then, on a Saturday morning 6 weeks after I lost my green card, something happened. It was 7:23 a.m. My daughter was sitting at the kitchen table, eating cereal with so much concentration that milk dripped down her chin. I was making coffee, half asleep, still wearing my pajamas. The mail usually came in the afternoon, but sometimes the postal worker made an early pass for packages. I heard the familiar sound of the mailbox flap opening and closing. I didn't think anything of it. Bills, catalogs, maybe a birthday card from my mother-in-law. I finished making my coffee, took a sip, and wandered outside to get the mail. There were 4 pieces: a grocery store coupon, an insurance statement, a flyer for pizza, and a white envelope with the return address USCIS National Benefits Center in the corner. My heart stopped. I knew the envelope. I had seen pictures of it on immigration forums, posted by people who had waited months or years for it to arrive. It was thin, official, unremarkable, and it contained either good news or bad news. I couldn't open it. I stood in the driveway, barefoot, coffee growing cold in my hand, staring at that envelope like it might bite me. My daughter's voice drifted through the front door. Daddy, my cereal is getting soggy. I walked back inside. I set the envelope on the kitchen counter, next to the toaster. I poured myself more coffee. I sat down across from my daughter and watched her eat her soggy cereal. She was wearing her ladybug pajamas, the ones with the red and black dots, and her hair was sticking up in 17 different directions. She looked like a tiny, messy, beautiful disaster. And she was the reason I couldn't open that envelope. Because if it was bad news, if the green card was denied, if the application had been rejected, if some technicality had tripped me up, then I would have to tell her. I would have to explain why we might have to leave the only country she had ever known. I would have to watch her face crumple the way it did when she dropped her ice cream or when her favorite cartoon ended. And I wasn't ready for that. Not on a Saturday morning. Not ever. Daddy, what's that? My daughter asked, pointing at the envelope with a spoon. Mail, I said. Can I open it? She asked. She loved opening mail, any mail. Birthday cards, holiday cards, even the credit card offers that came with fake plastic cards inside. She liked the tearing sound, the mystery, the possibility of something surprising. I looked at the envelope. I looked at my daughter, and I remembered something Brenda had said in that DMV. Something I had almost forgotten. Your daughter doesn't need to know everything, but she needs to know that you're not afraid. I wasn't sure if that was true. I was definitely afraid. But maybe I could pretend not to be, just for a minute, just long enough to open an envelope. Okay, I said. You can open it. Her eyes lit up. She put down her spoon, wiped her hands on her pajama shirt, and reached for the envelope. I held my breath. She tore it open carefully, not the way adults tear open envelopes, but the way children do, as if the paper might contain something alive that needed to be released slowly. A single piece of paper slid out, and inside the paper, attached with what looked like temporary adhesive, was a card. Green, shiny, official. My daughter pulled it free and held it up to the light. Daddy, what's this? She asked. I couldn't speak. I couldn't breathe. I could only stare at that little green card, my new green card with my name, and my photo, and my fingerprint, and my future, all printed on a piece of plastic the size of a credit card. It had arrived, not in 12 months, not in 8 months, in 6 weeks. 6 weeks, Because a DMV lady named Brenda had taken a risk. Because a USCIS operator named Maria had listened. Because an emergency adjudicator named David had believed me. Because I had learned to say the right words at the right time. Not perfectly, but bravely. Daddy, it has your face, my daughter said, holding the card next to my cheek. You look funny. I laughed. It came out wet and loud and probably scared her a little. But I couldn't help it. I laughed and cried at the same time, which is a thing adults do when they've been holding their breath for 6 weeks and finally get to exhale. Can you read what it says? I asked, pointing to the top of the card. My daughter squinted at the letters. She was in kindergarten. She knew her alphabet. She knew some words. She sounded it out slowly, the way her teacher had taught her. Keep permanente. Resident, C card. She looked up at me proud. I read it. I read the card. You did, I said. You read your first official government document. She had no idea what that meant. She just knew she had done something good. Something that made her daddy smile. Something that involved letters and sounds and the magic of turning symbols into meaning. And in that moment, I realized something. She was learning English too. Not because she had to, because she wanted to. Because English was the language of ladybug recitals and Saturday morning cereal and envelopes that could change your life. I picked her up and spun her around the kitchen. Green card still in her hand. Both of us laughing. Then I put her down, took the card, and held it like a holy relic. Permanent resident. That's what it said. That's what I was. That's what Brenda had helped me become. I walked to my phone and sent a text to the number Brenda had given me, the one she said I could use if something good happens. 3 words. It arrived. Thank you. Then I made my daughter another bowl of cereal, because the first one had gotten soggy, and that was a tragedy I could actually fix. A stranger saved more than my status. The green card sits in my wallet now, right behind my driver's license, exactly where it belongs. I check for it sometimes, not because I'm afraid it's gone, but because I'm still getting used to the idea that it's there. 3 years have passed since that Saturday morning when my daughter opened the envelope. 3 years of work and school and ladybug recitals. 3 years of watching her grow from a 5-year-old who sounded out permanent resident card into an 8-year-old who reads chapter books before bed and corrects my grammar when I forget the past tense. She doesn't remember the fear. That's the gift I gave her, not a green card, but a childhood unmarked by panic. She remembers the ladybug costume. She remembers the wiggle dance. She remembers the woman at the DMV who smiled at her once when I brought her along on a renewal visit. But she doesn't remember the sleepless nights, the shaking hands, the 27-minute hold music. And that's exactly how it should be. But I remember everything. I remember Brenda's concrete-colored eyes that turned warm when I mentioned my daughter. I remember the beaded chain on her reading glasses and the way she pushed her paperwork aside to make room for my despair. I remember the sticky note with 3 sentences and the binder with the circled paragraph and the whisper about a department that only worked Monday through Thursday. I remember Maria's voice when she said, I have a daughter too, and David's gravelly reassurance that stumbling English is honest English. I remember all of them. And I remember what Brenda said as I was leaving at DMV. Someday, you'll see someone standing where you're standing now. And when you do, you'll help them. I didn't know when that day would come. I didn't know if I would recognize the moment when it arrived, but 3 years later, I found myself standing in line at the same DMV, not at window 7, but at window 12, rearing my driver's license. The line was long, the air was stale. A woman ahead of me was holding a manila folder and crying quietly into her sleeve. Her English was broken, her hands were shaking, and when the clerk at window 12 told her she needed for my 90 and the 12-month wait, the woman's face crumpled like paper. I walked over to her. I didn't plan it. My feet just moved. Excuse me, I said, and my voice was calm because 3 years of practice had made it calm. I couldn't help overhearing. I lost my green card once too, There's another way. She looked at me with the same desperate hope I had once felt, the same fear, the same exhaustion, and I saw myself in her eyes, the version of me that had stood at window 7, holding a sticky note, praying that a stranger would care. I told her about the regulation, about the emergency adjudication team, about the right words to say on the phone. I didn't give her Brenda's number. Brenda had retired last year, and I didn't know who sat at window 7 now. But I gave her something better. I gave her the truth. That the system is broken. That the people inside it aren't. That perfect English isn't the goal. That fear can be a teacher if you let it. That sometimes a stranger who has nothing to gain is the only one who can save you. She thanked me. She hugged me. She walked out of that DMV with a phone number written on a piece of paper, not a sticky note. Because I didn't have any, but the back of a grocery receipt. I watched her go, and I thought about Brenda, about the chain of kindness that had started with her mother in El Salvador and traveled through Brenda and through Maria and through David and through me and now through this woman whose name I didn't even know. That's the thing about kindness. It doesn't end with you. It passes through you. You are not the destination, you are the bridge, and every time you help someone, you make the bridge a little longer, a little stronger, a little more able to carry the next person who needs to cross. I learned English through fear. That's the honest truth, not through textbooks or apps or expensive courses. Through the terror of losing my status. Through the panic of standing at a DMV counter. Through the desperation of a phone call that could have gone wrong but didn't. But I also learned something else. I learned that English is not just words, it's connection. It's the ability to say I need help and have someone understand. It's the ability to say thank you and mean it with your whole chest. It's the ability to say I've been where you are and watch someone's shoulders drop because they're not alone anymore. That's what Brenda gave me. Not a green card. Not a sticky note. Not a regulation number. She gave me the understanding that my English, even the broken, stumbling, imperfect version, was enough. Because the people who matter don't care if you say green card with an accent. They care if you show up. If you keep trying. If you refuse to give up even when the line is long and the wait is endless. And the system feels like it was designed to break you. She tells me that more better isn't correct. And I pretend to be annoyed. But actually I'm proud. So proud. Because she learned English the way all children learn, through immersion. Through necessity, through love. She didn't study it. She lived it. And that's what I want for you. Not perfection, not fluency, not the ability to sound like you were born in Ohio. I want you to live the language, to make mistakes in public, to say the wrong word and laugh about it, to call a stranger for help and stumble through your explanation and realize that stumbling is not failing, it's learning. It's always learning. I still have the sticky note. It's in my nightstand drawer, next to my daughter's first lost tooth and a photo of my wife on our wedding day. The blue ink is faded now. The edges are soft, but the words are still there. 3 sentences, 12 words, a lifeline. I look at it sometimes, on days when I feel like I don't belong, on days when my accent feels too thick, on days when someone asks me to repeat myself and I want to disappear. I look at that sticky note, and I remember Brenda, and I remember that a stranger saved more than my status. She saved my belief that I deserve to be here, and now, it's your turn. You're watching this video because you want to learn English, or because you're struggling, or because you lost something important, a card, a status, a sense of belonging. And you're wondering if it's even possible, if you'll ever feel comfortable in this language, if you'll ever stop feeling like an outsider. I'm here to tell you, yes. Not because it's easy, because it's worth it, and because somewhere out there, there's a Brenda waiting for you. A person who has been where you are, a person who will push aside their paperwork, take off their reading glasses, and look you in the eyes. A person who will give you a sticky note, or a phone number, or just a moment of their time. You just have to show up. You just have to keep showing up. You just have to say, in whatever English you have, I need help. and then let the bridge carry you across. So here we are, you and me, a stranger on a screen, a stranger in a comments section, connected by a story about a lost green card, a DMV lady who cared, and a little girl in a ladybug costume who never knew how close she came to losing everything. But this story isn't really about immigration. I've been there. Keep going. That someone could be Brenda. It could be Maria. It could be me, right now, looking at you through this camera. Or it could be you, tomorrow, for someone else. Because here's the truth they don't put in textbooks. Language isn't grammar. It's courage. And courage isn't the absence of fear. It's being terrified and picking up the phone anyway. It's standing in a DMV line with shaking hands and still saying your name. It's watching this video right now, even though your English isn't perfect, and understanding every single word. You understood this story, didn't you? You felt the panic. You felt the hope. You felt the moment the envelope opened. That's not luck. That's your brain learning the way it was designed to learn, through emotion, through story, through the messy, beautiful chaos of being human. So here's my challenge to you. Before you click away, write one sentence in the comments. Just one. It can be about your own lost green card moment. It can be a word you struggled with today. It can be I'm still trying. Because every sentence you write is a bridge, and bridges are how we cross from fear to belonging. I'll read every single one, and next week, I'm telling you another story, this one about a taxi driver in New York who taught me the difference between stop and stay. You don't want to miss it. So hit that subscribe button, ring the bell, and if this story helped you even a little, share it with someone who's standing in their own DMV line right now, invisible and afraid. Tell them a stranger said, your English is enough. You are enough, and a bridge never breaks. See you in the next one.